Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Fink. It's what date is it? It's January 13th, 2022. And I'm here with my co-host, Ted Shilowitz, and our friend and guest today, Rony Abovitz. This is Rony's third appearance in as many months. So he's calling himself the third Beatle now.
Yeah, in two more, Rony, we're going to have to get you a purple velvet coat like they do on the Saturday Night Live when you guest star for 5 times.
I thought I was the Neil Young sitting in on Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
I know we're going to work on our guitar theme song for your next appearance.
Yes,
absolutely.
So I just want to say before we get started, this podcast is sponsored by Verbella, which is a 3D business conferencing network, sort of a second life for business. And we are very appreciative of their support. Today is also our first show on AWE Live. So AWE Live is going to be carrying the podcast just like YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes do. So we'll be doing talkbacks after they post the podcast on AWE Live on Fridays. So it's a chance to make this a little more interactive than it has been up to now. So Rony Abovitz, welcome. We don't treat Rony like a regular guest and bring him in after the news. We make him go through all the news with us. Rony, as everybody must know, is the founder and former CEO of Magic Leap, which was in the news this week. And we'll get to that. It's always great to hear about the Magic Leap 2, an amazing device that I was lucky enough to have a look at a couple of months ago. So I think great things are going to happen now as a result of this development. I told you guys a few days ago this was a slow news week, but actually we had a couple of good stories dropped, including today. Philip Rosedale is coming back to Second Life.
Yes, I read about this morning. Yes,
that's amazing.
Let's first of all say, I mean, all this talk about the metaverse. Arguably, the metaverse has been here for 19 years. Right. They have a big economy. They're actually registered as a bank, but they stopped scaling about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they make plenty of money, it's obviously if you're not growing, it's hard to find an exit. So Brad Oberweiger, who has a investment fund and is a friend of Rosedale's, came in and bought out Benchmark and the other VCs that had backed Second Life. And so now, I think 5 months after that deal closed, his buddy Rosedale is coming back in with an investment from High Fidelity, some assets, employees, and patents, it said, and he's going to join the company or work with the company as an advisor. So this led me to some great headlines that I did not really use. The second coming of Philip Rosedale, of course. You would have to know.
That works.
You could do a second chance for Second Life.
Yeah, that works.
Then I thought a second wind for Second Life.
Second wind, Second Life. That's pretty good.
Sort of means that they burned up their first chance, and I wouldn't call it their first chance burned up. I would call their first chance kind of stalled.
Yeah, and there could be the dead cat bounce reference or something you could get. There's all kinds of things. But look, Philip is a friend of the show, just like Rony is. He's been on with us. He is a kindred spirit. He is an absolute OG of the metaverse when you think about it, right? Because he's been in it longer than we have by a long shot.
He was the original CTO of Real Networks.
Absolutely. And he's a guy that, you talk about foresight, right? I mean, my job, I get paid to have foresight. Charlie, you get paid to be, within the press and report on your foresight. Yeah, and we sort of do all this, but he gets such props for being way ahead of us and really understanding that this is going to be something. And it makes really good sense from a timing standpoint that someone with that much chops and that much understanding of what to do about building an economy around something that now is called the metaverse, that he would enter back into the fray. So good on him. I'm excited to see what he does with Second Life and Third Life, or whatever else it turns into.
Actually,
be, right?
very exciting because he's in the game when the wave is really taking off.
Yep.
And I bet you they get acquired by somebody who's like, okay, we need something, and people who know what they're doing, one of the larger players. I think someone's going to roll them up.
Do you think Satya at Microsoft says, you know what? They've been doing it longer than anybody else. We need it. We need to joke. We need to grow faster in this area. Maybe we incorporate them. That's a possibility.
It wouldn't be a bad acquisition. And, Microsoft, knows how to scale stuff. They scale Minecraft.
They've done pretty well by Altspace, I would say.
Yeah.
So I don't, Second Life, well, I've got my suspicions, but I think Second Life stalled because they just didn't evolve with the market. They kind of got stuck with their thing. And, they don't have an app for game consoles. They don't have an app for mobile. And those were the things that led to explosive growth for Rec Room. So I just don't know how you play without a mobile app. So hopefully.
And it was, in their DNA, they were never really a gaming environment. They were a social and commerce and sharing environment, which what we've learned is it just doesn't scale well and it's not as sticky. People need a reason to go someplace to do things, and then other things happen. So when you enter into Fortnite to play the game, you have a comfort zone of hanging out with your friends and then maybe seeing a concert or watching a
but you
virtual
can hang
movie.
out with your friends using a game console, a smartphone.
Right. It's so ubiquitous, right?
Yeah. So I think the cross-platform thing and the idea that the metaverse is a cross-platform experience of the internet, makes a lot of sense. And I just don't see how you can not have a mobile app, because that's where people are today.
Right. I agree.
So you guys know about this company, Amaze VR? They do VR concerts. They just raised 50 million, bringing their total raise to 30. But the idea is that we all are in VR or MR, and we meet up and attend. So we are live. And of course, the concert has been captured volumetrically. But since it's in VR, we can be all around it, close up with it, in the middle of it. So interesting idea. I've never done it, but it sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And the question is, will that at some point become the order of the day? That it is.
Well, will VR concerts become a thing? And again, you get into the whole thing. Well, do you have to attend with a headset? It sounds like with Amaze, you do, but there's been a lot of virtual concerts. Travis Scott, The Weeknd did this thing on TikTok. So those are virtual conferences too. They're just not you're not a fully embodied avatar in a, completely occluded virtual world.
Yeah, and what I read about Amaze recently, and I think most other companies that are doing this, is they're all realizing that they have to have a cross-platform. To your point about do it on a console, do it on a game system, do it on a phone. You can't just make yourself bespoke to one device or one ecosystem, because it's just not enough for viability. It may be great from the ultimate experiences here, just like if you and I, or the three of us, were boxing fans, we want to be ringside. That's the best experience, but there's got to be a lot of other experiences, including watching it on pay-per-view or watching the repeat someplace else that's not on pay-per-view. It's all about finding scale, right? So I think that's ultimately what the most successful companies in these realms will do, is make the ultimate experience, which can live in mixed reality or virtual reality or whatever most newfangled experience, but then open it up to as many people that want to get behind a paywall and experience something, even if they're just on a laptop or a mobile phone.
So next topic, Kura Gallium, a small company from the Bay Area, wins Best of CES with some AR glasses that have 150-degree field of view. They weigh 80 grams.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. 8K per eye and 95% transparency. So even in brightly lit areas, you can supposedly see the graphics that are overlaid or anchored to reality. So it sounds like an amazing device. And if it does all these things, certainly deserving of this award, which is very prestigious. They have 30,000 entries a year. Kura kept it kind of a secret. Kelly Peng, the scientist behind it, has multiple degrees, very well respected person in that field. But I guess it's a prototype. I don't think they have a deal to manufacture them. But, we were talking in the green room before we started, about if it had been at CES and the word got out, the line would have let in outside of the door of the convention center to put it on.
Yeah, well, and certainly Rony, as one of the purveyors and creators of viable, useful mixed reality, and that continues on its track, which we can talk about in a minute.
Yeah, that's next up.
Yeah, you might, have some opinions about, is it real? Is it not real? 8K per eye. And certainly the three of us need to get our eyes on the most current iteration of this.
Yeah, I
to
mean,
see what
Charlie and
what
you both have seasoned eyes at this point. I would invite her and put it on beforehand and talk about it, because you guys have seen a lot of things. And, but my take is with those kind of specs and with what they're building, they're not long for the world. If it's all real and one of the major players sees that, they should be gone, right? They should be picked up and rolled up, because at their size, price, they're not a gigantic company. It feels like everything, all the big companies are spending 15, 20 billion a year to do. If they can do that with I don't know, 30, 50 people, that's amazing. Give her all the awards, and I think an Apple or Facebook or somebody is going to buy you in the next 30 days. But I think you guys should have her on and put it on and see what's real.
Yeah, and maybe
actually it's funny to say what's real. None of it is real, right? All of it is virtual.
Correct.
All of it is augmented. But just put it on, and maybe there's a quality or something that's missing, or maybe it's amazing. And if it's amazing, then call Tim Cook and have him roll her up.
Well, and I think all these things probably I'll see if I could come up with a terminology, need to go through the KG test, which stands for Carl Guttag, who is kind of the ultimate debunker and, for pro, con, and different, but he takes a very serious view of this stuff and does a deconstruction on a lot of this stuff.
Have you done a write-up on them yet?
I don't know. We can certainly research it and find out. He does a write-up on lots of things, and he very often points to the weaknesses in these devices, which is his sort of goal set and his right to do that. We tend to look at the positive parts of these and try and understand that the weaknesses will hopefully get solved over time. He doesn't really take that view. He takes a much more, which rightly so, a scientific view of what is it doing right now at this moment in time, and what are these pixels actually doing on our eyes, and how is it actually being created. So I would say he'd be a good one to run this past and see what he thinks about this.
All right, those specs are more than what some companies that are spending 10, 20 billion a year are trying to do by far. And you don't even need to get all the way there. If you got to somewhere between 70 and 100 degrees and you were at 4K, I mean, you don't even need 150.
That'd be a miraculous device that everybody would
talk
want.
about the 75 or 76.5 field of view of the Magic Leap 2. So I got to try this baby at actually a Christmas party over in Culver City, where they have their sales office now. And of course, they made me swear to secrecy. You can't talk about it. You can't, don't write about it. I was like, okay. So they let me try it, and let me say, wow, really amazing. Super light, huge field of view, huge. So, when you say when you get to 75, it almost after that doesn't matter. Which is exactly true. You don't need to turn your head that much to keep the.
Do you need much more than that? That's my question. I think
probably not. I think
around where maybe a little bit more this way or that, but it's sort of in the zone.
Yeah, it felt. At that size, it feels right, especially if you're a glasses wearer. So I thought it felt right, and so the company announced today that they are doing an early release to 4 healthcare companies that they've been working with. I think that's great. I don't know how many units they're talking about, probably not thousands, but it's great to see them in the hands of customers. I thought Peggy Johnson, the new CEO, had some smart things to say in the announcement, particularly because they are targeting professions like surgeons who are already wearing things on their face to help them with their jobs. Right. So you see that in manufacturing, you see that in pharmaceuticals, other industries, people wear loops and other, analog devices that help them. Surgeons usually have some kind of a very, very strong spotlight or flashlight and headgear. So
Yeah, they're comfortable with
it
headgear.
makes
Right?
sense to take what they're already doing and make it that much better. So I think it'll be exciting to see the results. I think everybody has said all along that one of AR's greatest opportunities is to augment doctors, clean up screen pollution, create a clinical environment where the doctor can keep his eyes on the patient, but also integrate the incredibly useful technology that has been getting in the way sometimes. So,
And Charlie, all three of us, I believe, have experienced it. None of us really can talk too much about it, but I will say this. It's going to be exciting to see developers who could do whatever they want, put their hands on it. Because the team that designed it, like it was largely designed and set into a first production run before the pandemic.
Sure.
What we were thinking then and how things evolved, won't get too much into that, but like, it's basically like a McLaren with like a 0 to 60 2.4 second engine. I mean, the graphics, the AI are insane.
Yeah.
You haven't even like, they probably didn't even show you anything under the hood. I'm just super excited to see like what some rogue developers, when they get there, like, oh my God, it's like an F-16. Let's take it out for a spin. I'm very excited to see what happens when studios or just anybody starts to play with within there. It's chock full of all sorts of stuff that I can't talk about right now, but when it rolls out there, it'll be great. And, I just want to put kudos to all the people that designed the thing. It's like we packed everything you could imagine in there,
Yeah, and
$2,300.
Yeah, and as Rony well knows, because I've been a little quieter than I normally am for this section, I am under a very significant and real NDA about this. But I think at this point, unless Rony puts his hands up and goes, no, I can say I have definitely seen the device multiple times through its evolution, and am very enthused by what it can do, how large the field of view is, and how capable this device is on achieving what the dream of mixed reality that Rony, started X amount of years ago, starting to really come to fruition now. The first gen device proved certain parts of the equation. This second gen device starts to prove the rest of the equation. And I will still say starts to prove, like we are still not at end state here, right?
I will say this, Ted,
Yeah.
For anyone who actually follows an arc of the field and some of the stuff, like the Gen 1 for a lot of us, but particularly for what I was doing, that was our Mercury. And this is the Gemini, but I got to actually see what Saturn would be.
Right.
Which none of you guys have seen. Now I don't really know what'll happen with Saturn, but like we were building Mercury, Gemini, and Saturn in parallel.
Yeah.
So you guys have had a glimpse at Gemini, and Gemini is probably what most of the world wanted, not Mercury. But you need to get someone in space, and you need to like learn a bunch of things. You need to send a test probe out in the world. And I think only when you understand the full story, I think Ted and I've had this discussion, like this is an arc, a narrative arc over time. If you look at one episode and don't watch the rest of the movie, it doesn't make any sense. So finally, part 2 of the movie's coming into play, and hopefully the Saturn V aspect will also emerge one day, because that was insane. That was like, if you go, why did people get all excited? It's because we'd show them Mercury, Gemini, Apollo. We'd show them with the Saturn V. This is where it's all going. And you guys got to see at least the part 2, which is exciting. We can't talk more about it until the thing ships, but that's great. And by the way, bring Kelly on. If she's done this, then like somebody buy her now, like, because if she's pulled that off, something that like teams of thousands to 20,000 plus can't do, give her a Nobel Prize, buy her company, and put her on the pedestal and give her the Edison Award. And all
we 100% agree. And all I will say is that I am really enthused for more than just the small select amount of people that have been able to see the evolution of the Magic Leap and this Magic Leap 2 device. I'm very excited for more humans to get their eyes on this, because they will see that progress does get made. To your point about, the space race and moving through Mercury to Gemini to Apollo, progress gets made. And when you see the progress, your mind will start to open and you will start to see the possibilities. It's
It
a very
actually,
exciting time.
I'll tell you, my time in the thing, and I know we have a lot of other stuff to talk about, many things I had imagined in my mind really start to unfold. You're like, now you can have many people not to use, you don't have to use that much imagination anymore. With the ML1, there's like this, oh, you have to overcome that. It reminded me of playing with my first Mac. Like the screen was this big and it was black and white, and I had to imagine this flight simulator one day will not just be wireframe, will not just be black and white, will not just be 10 frames per second, but you still got a thrill out of it if you can use your imagination. On the Gen 2, it's kind of like, okay, even if you don't get it, it's hard to deny. And I think that's, by the way, I think that this wave 22, 23, 24 devices coming out from various players who are really investing the time, money, they're all going to be quite impressive.
Yes, that's right.
Not just the ML2, but I think there's other things in VR and other, that are really, everyone's learning, and that learning curve is starting to come together, and technology is getting smaller, GPUs, AI, sensors, all sorts of things are happening. And people who are doubting the field should stop doubting the field after this wave of stuff, you know, that comes out this year, next year. I think people will be very
I largely
impressed.
agree with that. I think that's correct. Yeah.
So getting back to Apple rumors then, speaking of
Speaking of other stuff we can't talk about, yeah.
So you know, the drumbeat for later in 2022 is loud, but I'm thinking 2022 they start to give some specs to developers, like, you know, big media companies.
Look, I mean, the articles that have hit this week are about how the wave of mixed reality AR wearables will affect the Apple stock price, which of course is, you know, a high flyer by all stretch of the imagination in terms of $3 trillion company at one moment this a couple of weeks ago. And the belief structure that Apple is going to get into this game is taking, you know, the various sort of stock pundits and the street, as we call it, to new heights of a potentially $200 or plus sort of valuation, sort of, you know, stock price and valuation well over $3 trillion at that point. All we can do is ride that wave and hope that they're right, because, you know, when Apple does things, to Rony's point about the Macintosh, they will set the next stage of the evolution of the use case of these devices, where pre-Apple on almost anything, there's always a use case of someone that did it before Apple, right? Apple is often called out as the most innovative company in the world, but I would argue that they are not the most innovative company in the world, but they are the best execution company in the world. And others do things first. Apple watches, learns, and listens, watches other companies stumble around in the dark or the near dark, and then until they see the light, and they put huge amounts of resources and huge amounts of testing cycles and human engineering and human ergonomics and use case cycles against something before they release, right? So when they do choose to release this at some point in whatever that time horizon is, it will likely be extraordinarily meaningful, even if it only gets released as a very high priced device for a year or so for developers to help figure out this new form of compute. Which no one else has really had the wherewithal to take that kind of stance, right? To sort of like, Rony, you tried that. You made an attempt to do that. It was sort of bastardized by a lot of the forces around you that said, no, let's go full consumer. This is a consumer device. But I know in your heart, you needed that time horizon to let people figure out what these devices could be and could use as their end game. And I think Apple may very well be the one to allow that stage to be set properly.
Let me give you what my theory said. What I was trying to do with the Gen 1, and I'll try to give you my view on what I think Apple's doing. Gen 1 was a stem cell. It was like not consumer, not developer. It was just a stem cell you need to put into the environment, put into a lot of different hands and see what they do with it and let the gradient evolve. And it turns out the evolution and where the market was going to be a certain subset of enterprise was happening first. We actually learned a ton. And the stem cell theory, if you look back in 10 years, was the right move to do. Maybe in the immediate thing, you're like, so it wasn't consumer, it wasn't enterprise, it was a stem cell trying to find out where is the market going to be. And you're kidding yourself if you think you know where the market is going to be in a brand new everything. You have to put something out there. So what's an Apple going to do? First of all, I think the bar on them is incredibly high. So let me just separate VR from AR. I think the VR bar, they have to be so much better than anything an Oculus or an HTC is doing, which means
Or a Valve Index.
insane graphics, right? Insane power, lightweight, but they've got to solve the physiologic issues. What I mean by the physiologic issues, I don't think an Apple is going to release a product that makes you dizzy. And they're just, you can't like do that. I think they're just not going to do that, which means a whole bunch of other factors that these other companies can overlook. They don't have the same reputation to overcome. These guys can't, personally, I think they can't do that. And they also have to solve super complicated optic issues in VR that the other companies have also just ignored. They're like, we'll solve that later. I don't think Apple has the luxury of solving it later. So the interesting thing is, if they've solved it, is it really Apple grade perfect? You know, like your Watch 7, your iPhone 13. If it's not that good, because the bar on everything else they make is that good, people are going to all over them. Sorry, the technical term, I think vomit all over them, because they have no, I look at how much flack I took being a brand new company trying to do a brand new device, but not carrying this burden of like also shipping like iPhone 13s and things that are so mature and perfect after 20 years of refinement of mobile phone. And, you know, since the iPhone came out. So, I mean, they have such a high bar of perfection. I think they're going to wait until it's really, really, really amazing, because anything less, I think they could take a giant black eye. And why do it? And by the way, having what I described to you guys was the Saturn V Apollo. That's the only thing they could ship. And I can't tell you guys what's in that, but that's what we imagined an Apple would do when we started designing that and figuring all that out. That's insanely hard. That last thing they've got to do, and I understand why they're going to spend 10, 20 billion a year. And even that may not be enough, because only a certain speed, all the supply chain, all the engineers in the world you can hire can move and think about something. But here's the tricky part: without releasing in the world and learning. So the advantage, smaller companies or companies that don't have the same reputation in hardware, we can go out there and get dirty and get banged up a little bit, but then we learn a lot and we cycle and cycle. Can they do that? Do they have a license to put something out that's like far from perfect? Like the Apple one was far from perfect. The Apple II was far from perfect. Now everything they do is perfect. There is no room for anything less. So I think it's a real dilemma. And Charlie, it'd be great to get your take. How do they overcome this perfection expectation, which is super high and super crazy?
I don't believe Ted's inside information notwithstanding, I don't believe 22 is going to be Apple's year for VR and AR. I just don't.
I agree with you.
They're good at keeping secrets, but they're not that good. And if it was really going to be this year, there'd be more than just refusing to tell me shit. There'd be all sorts of people who would be saying that, because Apple would be working with the best developers, and those are big companies, and people don't keep their mouths shut. So if Apple was really getting ready to launch it, a lot more people would know about it. So I'm skeptical about 22, but you know, people who supposedly have inside info, like Robert Scoble, say it will be. That said, we all know Scoble has been saying that since 2016. So I don't know why 22 is his year, other than it wasn't 21. So, I mean, they are good at keeping secrets, but as you get close to realizing something of this scale, it's not a secret anymore. Right. So I mean, you know, and you went through that yourself, Rony. I mean, the closer you got to the Magic Leap 1 being released, the more people had to know about it, internally, externally, every-ternally, because that's how products are released, you know. Now, then it belongs to millions of people. You know, so I do.
Let's say you're gearing up to ship.
Apple is going to, you know, it has to just work. I mean, even the Oculus Quest, which is simple, doesn't always work. You know, and there are factors beyond the control of the device, including, you know, connectivity and, you know, random system problems that continue to persist in all of technology. And I just think Apple, it just has to work. So if they're there,
talk about that for a second. Talk about what that means, because it needs to work in every kind of home and apartment, and all kinds of lighting. whether you have glass mirrors everywhere, a furry cat, or it's raining outside, you're going to walk outside with their thing. What do you mean I can't use it outside? So now it has to work in every kind of weather environment. By the way, that problem, autonomous vehicles are still fighting through with like $30,000 LiDAR systems on top of their,
It's got to be super light. It's got to be portable. It's got to have a battery of at least 2 hours. You know, I mean, they got to get the thing way down in weight. Even the Quest is still
2 hours is a no ship. You cannot ship with all the expectation of the fruit company. You cannot ship something with a 2-hour battery.
Okay, so here's the question. You guys are debating.
That's worse than what we did in 2018. You can't do that.
But here's the yin and the yang question on this, the philosophical question. Is this the moment that a company like Apple breaks from that storied tradition of holding to this kind of sense of, let's get it as close to perfect as we can, let's smooth out all the rough edges and then release it? Do they actually take a different tack on a device like this and say, all the things you brought up are things that need to be resolved over time, but this is a 10-year plus journey to get it to that level of sophistication and polish, and we can't wait that long. Our competitors in the space are delivering on visual experiences and visual compute in a way that is gaining market traction. Facebook, Meta is doing it, Sony is doing it, HTC is doing it, Valve is doing it, et cetera, et cetera. They're entering and holding that space and finding consumer traction. And is this the moment, you know, inside those meetings in those halls where people say, we know what we need to achieve, but if we wait that long, it will be a tactical error. We need to actually get product into the marketplace that can at least fire on all the deliverables that we can do today with our chipsets and our OS and our sensibility of how we view compute and how we view the space, and see if we can put it out there. And maybe the leading indicators of that are sometimes Apple, and more on the software side these days, will launch things that don't kind of hit it out of the park immediately, like Apple Arcade, right? And things that don't get huge, like it's so fantastic and so much better than everything else out there that everybody just instantly gravitates towards it. And there are a few times in the long history of Apple products, like I was thinking when you guys were talking about, remember the Cube, the Apple Cube that was sort of like what the next device was supposed to be, and it was that Cube that was built in Lucite, and it just didn't quite get there, right? Some of us had them.
Cool looking in the day.
It was cool looking, but it just didn't have enough functionality. It didn't have, and the early Mac Minis sort of suffered from this too, right? So I think while we want to put it up on a certain pedestal, there's also a certain reality check of maybe Apple does need to just enter into the market with a imperfect product, because this market, and you know this better than anybody, Rony, this market of virtual reality and mixed reality is imperfect by its nature. There are so many problems that are so much harder to solve than just putting a screen up in front of our face that we may have to give it that 10 or 15 years to get from iPhone 1 stage to iPhone 14.
I've got to take I'll just take the
contrarian view.
Oppositionally defined view on that.
Yes.
The visual perfection of the iPad Pro, the MacBook Pro, the iMacs, the iPhone 13, even your iWatch 7, they're so visually perfect. They run smoothly. There is no way they can suffer this kind of brand hit. And hey, if you guys are listening to us, we're actually trying to be helpful.
And we're huge fans of your
product.
They
might appear on the show, but
they just can't take the brand hit of like, by the way, visual quality. You cannot ship anything worse than the visual quality of like an iPhone 13, iPad Pro, not on something with this much hype and expectation. By the way, if it's a pilot team, spend a few $100 million, yes, but not after spending 10 to 20 billion a year for God knows how many years and tens of thousands of people. You cannot ship something that's like not 10 times better than a Magic Leap 2 and the best thing on the planet, because you put so much time and money and energy and years, it better be the most
mind-blowing thing. Yeah.
Their investment from the rumor mill is so high, it has to hit all those visual quality metrics. And I know exactly what it takes to do that.
I agree. But, and for those that are visually watching, view it through the lens of the very first iPhone, or the very
Right.
first iPad, there's one there. You know, and we think about, was it the appropriate power and the appropriate use case?
Museum.
Yeah, my little hardware museum. And there's all Rony stuff is over here and all Oculus stuff is over here. It's just crazy. But through the lens of like, I think about the very first iPad and how quickly I was amazed at how wonderful it was, but also how quickly kind of underpowered it was. And they needed a few turns at the wheel. You know, by the time it got to iPad 3, iPad 4, they had largely kind of found the right balance, right? The watch, the same thing. I have 3 Apple Watches in the closet and I wear one sometimes, but it took until Apple Watch kind of 5 to get it really to the point where it was pretty good. And then 6 and 7, you know, you kind of like, it's locked in, right? So I just wonder if that first device, we might have to, and again, this may be just my nature of giving it a little breathing room, which is kind of always why I was a big fan of what you were doing, is like, you've got to give these things breathing room. They need time to figure out what they're going to do right and what they're going to do wrong. And we cannot just topple on top of these things and criticize every moment of every engineer and every evangelist and every creator that's trying to do something new, because it just takes cycles to get it right. And maybe, and this is just a maybe, this is me speculating, not anything I know or don't know, Apple may have to take a bigger leap this time than any other time in their history because of how complex putting something up on your eyes is compared to just putting it in a form factor where you sit it on a desk or hold it. That's kind of where
we talked about the watch, like 5 generations to get it right.
Yep.
Think about how many generations to get this right. And this is 10, 20x less complex.
Right. That's my point.
Than this other thing.
This for you,
That's my
audio
point.
listeners, is the iWatch on his wrist that runs.
Yes, the Apple Watch, right? Yes, yes. So, you know, from moving from this to this, while they sort of look the same, there were some really nice things about this little guy, you know, kind of thing. So it's kind of an amazing life that we all get to lead doing this stuff. It's sort of fascinating.
Quickly when we hang out. Our time together today is winding to a close. Rony, Sun and Thunder, your new company, say something.
Give us something.
Something, a morsel.
I have had my first, call it very quiet investor meetings.
All right.
So 22 might be a year of bringing in some folks on board, but it's going to be, I'll tell you a couple of things about it. I've got to keep it fairly under wraps because I've looked back at my last 2 companies, Mako and Magic Leap, and pretty much everything I was doing got copied by all kinds of giant companies who are on my tail. And I'm trying to be a little more low key about what this really is. And I'm not really telling anybody, but so I'll not tell you guys that, but I will say I started to have some really interesting, positive, early meetings with investors that were very, that was really good. So we'll look at that.
Can't wait. Thanks for listening, everybody, and have a great weekend. Rony, great seeing you. Ted, get off of Zoom, my friend.
My pleasure. And all I could say is it is great to be friends with both of you. I am so happy to have a genuine, wonderful friendship where we can share these ideas and concepts and let people sort of listen into our brains a little bit. It's very fun.
Come up with a theme song for your show?
What?
Yes, come up with a theme song. Absolutely.
Right.
We'd love for that. We'd love
and the great thing about
for you to write a theme song.
Nobody really knows how it's going to turn out.
Right. That's kind of why we wake up every morning, is I wonder what's going to happen today.
All right. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Ted.